Good evening or afternoon or night or day, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for joining us for another Olive Tree webinar. We've got a few more people joining us, so we're just gonna wait a second as everybody gets in the room. We're in for a treat tonight, everyone. Today, afternoon, whatever it might be. You've obviously joined us because you have a teenager in your life, or maybe multiple, that you would like to learn to connect better with. And I can guarantee you that by the end of this webinar, you will have some idea of how to do that better than you do at this very moment. Our presenter tonight is Amber Goodloe, who is obviously, she's a staff member at Olive Tree. She's a counselor here and has been here for multiple years. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself, but she's also has years and years of experience of working with teenagers. And one of the delightful things about Amber and teenagers is that she loves them. I'm sure she'll tell you that herself. She loves working with teenagers. So not only are you hearing from somebody who's got a lot of expertise on teens and TCK specifically, but actually really enjoys spending time with them. So I think you can trust what she has to say. As usual, before I turn it over to her, I'll just say, as usual, we ask you just to mute yourself as we go. We'll have a variety. You're welcome to leave your camera on if you prefer. That's totally up to you. We will have a variety of points for you to interact with Amber, either to give some feedback or ask questions. And we do that through the chat function as always. So you're welcome to use the chat to message hosts anytime you're wanting to participate, and we invite you to do that and encourage you to do that actually. And there will be some time for question and answer at the end with Amber. So I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amber. And thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, like she said, my name is Amber. I am excited to be here. Like she said, I love teenagers. And so anytime I get the chance to talk about them, I'm happy to, because I think teens get a bad rep because they can be incredibly challenging, but they are also what I often find myself saying, some of the most delightful creatures on earth. And so, yeah, like she said, I've worked with adolescents somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I've been a youth pastor, I've been a volleyball coach, I'm a counselor, I've worked in a variety of settings, and yeah, I've worked with adolescent TCKs for most of that. So I've lived overseas for 12 years, working with teenagers primarily. And so really have a passion for them and helping them figure out life, but also helping the rest of us figure out how to support and care for them and just understand kind of their world, their life, and what they need. So that is my hope for tonight. I hope that some of this will be helpful. It may or may not be anything new, but yeah, I hope that it will give you some tools or resources or encouragement. And then, yeah, we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So as things come up, I'd love to just dialogue with you about how to care for them more. So, oops, and let's see here if I can hit the right buttons and we'll go through our PowerPoint. So my hopes today is just to kind of understand teens today, to start off with. Just who are they? Because they're a very different and unique generation. Every generation is different. This one is no different. They've got characteristics that are unique to them. And just understanding some of the challenges and common issues of teens in general, teens overseas, just kind of a few key areas that they might struggle, but then really like at the bottom, I said here, sorry, I've got too many things open, discover helpful tools for connecting on a deeper level. That would really be my hope, is if teens need one thing, it's people who care about them and people who will enter their world. So that would be my biggest hope for today, is to understand their world and then how to enter that on a deeper level. This comic thing I came across a few months ago. So, you can see the picture and it's got some older people with this, kind of young guy. I think he's got some tattoos looking at each other. Anyway, says, I'll explain my generation if you explain yours. And it just made me laugh. And it seemed to mesh with his quotes. It is critical to know how to effectively connect intergenerationally. And I think that is something that is vital, is that most of us as adults grew up in a very different world than teenagers today. And so understanding how to bridge that gap. And it goes both ways. I think they don't understand our world and we don't understand theirs. And so figuring out how to do that, I think, is a critical piece of coming alongside teens. So I'm curious, and just in the chat box, if you can just shout out a few things. I'm not going to give a lot of time for this, but what traits define teens today in your observation? When you think about teens in general, what are some of the words that come to mind? Just first few, and I'll kind of read that out. I know some that I often hear from parents, I'll get you started, are like maybe selfish or rude. Okay. I've got connected to friends on social media, witty. I like that one. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind when you think of teens?
So informed, for instance, they have the internet and social media, and they know everything about everything.
Yes, they are very informed. That is a good word, for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm realizing a lot of these are coming directly to me.
Okay.
Yeah, so got lots of them here. Global, techie, screen obsessed, anxious, plugged in, private, confused, unpredictable, information overloaded. Lots of anxious on here, and lots of social media as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think all of that is true. I see one up here, constantly self-diagnosing, which connected to social media all the time, connected to internet. That is very true. And I think, someone said information overload. I think all of that it's so true. And I love I don't know exactly whoever said witty, but I think we often miss some of the really good stuff too. Like teens are incredibly resilient and they are hilarious and they are passionate. And they are caring and they're committed, like all of these things along with everything else. So yeah. So today's teens, just a few things, and this may or may not. So this is Generation Z, depending on where you're from. This isn't specifically for TCKs, but it actually applies to a lot of TCKs today. Just teens in general, kind of looking at who are they? They're social, they're multitaskers, they're entrepreneurs, educated, philanthropists, digital natives, and you can read the rest. They're a very diverse group of teens. And one of the things on here in the notes is the generational divide is larger than ever before. And I think that piece is really true. The gap and the differences between this generation and the older generations is huge. I think maybe in years past, it was maybe not as starkly noticeable, but now they are vastly, vastly different, which is where maybe some of you are stuck with, how do I support and how do I parent my teens? How do I care for the teens in my life? Because my goodness, are we different? And are we growing up in very, very different worlds? Yeah. And so I think it's just kind of, like I said, understanding them. And on this list, it also says mental health challenges, and none of you are surprised by that. I think that mental health was already a challenge for this generation due to social media, due to a lot of different factors. And then you add in the last couple of years of COVID and the amount of isolation that a lot of teens have been through around the world. And I think that's why you're getting so much anxiety and so much, depression or whatever. There's just a lot that they're processing through. Yeah. So this one made me laugh. Sorry. Because I said, do you speak teen? Because often, I think we're like, I don't even understand what they're saying. And so this is just a variety of slang words that I picked up. I did say these may vary region to region. So it's not about learning these words, but knowing what language, what slang words are teens using. That's important. It's a great way to connect when you know what they're saying. Also, it can be really important to understand because what they're saying might not mean what you think it means. And that can be really important to know if they're talking about something and you're like, oh, yeah, that's cool. I was talking about some of this at a different setting, and we talked about the one that says Netflix and chill, and just talking about that. Majority of us think, oh, yeah, they're going to go have a cute little movie night, which is not actually what Netflix and chill means. And so I think it's one of those important ways to be involved in teens' life is to pay attention to the words they're using and be interested in the words they're using. What does that mean? I don't get that. And they might laugh at you because, oh, mom, whatever. But being interested goes a long way. We'll talk about that. So yeah, I often ask teens, what do you mean by that? What's that word? And try to keep up with it because it's just a great way to connect with them. Yeah. So a few common issues that TCK adolescents face, or adolescents in general. I have some of these in bold, and they're the ones we're going to kind of talk through today. And then the others are also there. So grief and loss. If you are working with TCKs, you know how big of a challenge this can be. This is something that most likely you've heard a lot about. You've maybe talked about, but just the amount of grief that all of us living overseas, but that kids in particular can feel with just the amount of transition and loss. And so that's a key thing to process with teenagers. Identity as well. I think with teens, identity, that's part of the whole thing they're trying to figure out is, who am I? And so for TCKs, that's maybe intensified or unique to their story. I won't talk at length about that one, or I won't talk anymore actually, because I think there's a lot of good resources out there that we kind of often will go to. But that is a huge part of TCK adolescence and figuring out, who am I? Where is my place in this world? Because it's already hard when you're 15 trying to figure that out. And then when you've lived in 3 different countries, it just intensifies it. But yeah, depression and anxiety, some of you guys mentioned that when you think of teens, that it's more common than we would like to think. And so just processing through that, and it's definitely increased the last couple of years. So with that comes cutting or self-harm behaviors. That's incredibly common among adolescents in general, and TCKs are no different in that one, in their vulnerability to that. Gender and sexuality questions. We will talk about this a little bit more later on for sure, because you can't talk about teenagers today and not talk about this, because it's in their faces all the time. And so it's just something that we need to process through with them. And then others, eating disorders, PTSD, substance abuse. These are all things that can come up in adolescence. But like I said, the 4 are the ones that we'll talk through a bit today. And none of this will be in depth. My hope is not to dive deep into how to do any of these, but just to kind of look at an overview, to kind of understand what this looks like, and a few maybe tools for talking with kids who are struggling in these areas. So grief and loss. So according to Ruth Van Raken, unresolved grief is the most urgent mental health issue facing TCKs. And I really like that this one says unresolved grief, because grief doesn't have to cause mental health issues, but it's when they or we are not given the space to process through the grief, to make sense of it. And so this can lead to depression, self-harm, substance abuse, when all of that loss and sadness is trapped inside. And so, the last one, we must honor the potentially devastating effects of grief and loss in our lives. And again, potentially, it doesn't have to be devastating, but again, when we don't give them space to process and work through that grief, it can kind of wreak havoc on their mental health. So what happens when teens don't grieve well? And it's talking about teens. I think this would apply to most of us as adults, just saying, but physical illness, right? Like, it comes out in our bodies. And so maybe we're getting sick a lot. Maybe we're having tummy aches, psychological challenges. So again, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-harm. With the eating disorders one, a lot of times with that, it can be in this, my life is out of control and we're going from here to there and all these friends are leaving and I just want something I can control. And so they choose something like food or exercise, something to just stabilize them. And then it gets a little over the top or out of control. Social withdrawal, acting out. So just a few things that can happen when teens aren't given space to grieve well. Just a few facts. I won't go in depth with any of these. 7 in 10 say depression and anxiety are a major concern. I put on here a vast majority of adolescent clients at Olive Tree are coming for depression and related effects and symptoms. That is, when people ask me, what do you see? Like, why do teenagers come to you? Depression and, self-harm and everything that comes with that is the most common. It's not the only thing for sure. Anxiety would be up there, but that's why I end up seeing people, working with people is because of that. And so there's varying percentages of how many struggle with depression, and some of it isn't reported either. Like it says, only about 20% of depressed teens receive help. So a lot of times it's not noticed, it's not validated, or there's just not care, but they don't get the help that they need, which then can just kind of domino into a lot more intense issues. And so on here, teens need parents, teachers, and caregivers to recognize their suffering and help get them treatment. And so just paying attention to what you see. So what might you see in a depressed teen? Maybe some of this is very familiar, so I'm not, again, going to go in depth, but just irritability or anger is a good one to pay attention to, because we often think depression is sadness and crying all the time and moping, and it might look like that. But with kids and adolescents, anger is often a more common symptom or indicator of depression, because they take the sadness and rather than cry or be sad, it comes out as I'm mad at the world. And we often, I think a lot of us miss that, because then we think we're dealing with an angry teen who's just yelling at everybody, and we don't notice the grief and the sadness and the loss and the whatever that's going on under that. And so I want to highlight that one to pay attention to that if you have a really angry teen, and try to figure out what's under it, because there's more than just I'm mad. But with that, they could be sad, they could be withdrawing, change in eating and sleeping habits, just kind of paying attention to them is something different than what it normally is. And asking. I will say the one that says withdrawal from friends and family, some of that can be tricky. I would encourage you, especially watch for withdrawal from friends, because with adolescents, it's very normal to withdraw from family, to kind of separate, want their own identity, their own space. And so that doesn't have to be a big warning sign if they're disconnecting from parents. If it's a stark change, it's worth noticing, but pay attention especially to friends or community outside of family if they're kind of withdrawing from everybody. That's what I would is really important to pay attention to. So what can you do if if your kid is struggling and you think they might have depression? If someone that you're supporting, talk to them about what you see. Hey, seems like you've been isolating a lot. You haven't hung out with your friends in weeks. Like, everything okay? What's going on? Asking questions, and just not telling them, you seem really depressed. I think something's wrong with you. But just, noticing what you see in terms of behavior, in terms of their mood, and just kind of asking them about it. Be loving about it, not judgmental. Like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you ever go out anymore? That's not gonna get a teen to open up at all. Just, yeah, checking in with them, being gentle but persistent. Not giving up. If they say I'm fine, ask again. Don't, like I said, don't let it go if you're genuinely concerned. Listen without lecturing. We'll come back to that one at the very end. And then validate feelings. If they say, man, I'm just really bummed because, my friend moved, or we lost the soccer game. Or, I feel like life is hopeless right now. Our tendency can be, to try to talk them out of that. No, life isn't hopeless. It's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. But that's not helpful. So saying, oh yeah, that must feel really hard. Right. And then you can, earn the right to talk more, but starting with validating, even if it seems silly and irrational to you. Because I think a lot of times we forget that in their world, something that we might say, oh, that's small and that's not a big deal, to them that might be their whole world. And so giving space for that again, their world is not our world. And so something that happens at school, maybe 10 years from now won't matter, but right now it does. And so letting it matter right now and not telling them that it's silly, or irrational. Yeah. And then helping teens grieve, help them name their losses, help them talk through, okay, yeah, what have I lost? Who have I lost? All of that. Plan ahead. If you know a friend is leaving, or you're moving, or a teacher is leaving, whatever the scenario may be, start talking to them ahead of time about how to process that. Have them do a grief timeline. If someone in your life has never talked about grief, then starting, okay, let's look at the grief in your life. Like, what are the losses that you have experienced? And what do you miss about that? And talking through some of that. But really just giving permission and time to grieve. And in that process, taking care of our own grief. If your family is all grieving together, if you've all experienced the same loss, then it is vital that we do our own work, as we come alongside them and help them grieve as well. Because if we bury ours, chances are we're going to expect them to bury theirs. And that's not helpful to either of us, in the family or in the setting, whatever it may be. Yeah. And then, at the bottom, I said, in transition, RAFT. If you're not familiar with RAFT, you can Google it. There's a ton of resources, but it is a great way if you're helping people with transition and grieving and processing that. It's got some really great tools for working through all of that. So moving on, with some depression, can come self-harming behaviors. And so I want to touch base on some of this. So kind of looking at what is self-harm. And so one of the classic definitions is non-suicidal self-injury. It's a form of intentional self-injury without the intent of suicide, which I think is really important to note, is that we often think or assume they're trying to end their life. And in all reality, usually it's an attempt to numb or ease pain, so that they can continue living. It's actually an attempt at life almost. And so it seems backwards, but it's them saying, I want to live, but I don't know what to do with this pain. And so it comes out on themselves. Yeah. Types of self-harm, obviously cutting is the most common, the most familiar, but it can be a whole lot of other things. So it's worth just paying attention to. And so, if you're noticing changes in what your kid is wearing, or the students at your school or whatnot, just, paying attention to some of that, and noticing. But also, I guess, just noticing that self-harm is not confined to only cutting. It can be a variety of things. So some self-harm risk factors, having friends or family members who self-harm, they have to learn about it. And so if they have people in their lives who are self-harming and talking about it, then that puts them at a higher risk to try it out. It does not mean that they will. It's just a factor. But then the second one, or actually a few of these, I think some of these risk factors would be across the board for teenagers in general. But I think as TCKs, when you look at like the second one, experiencing stressful life situations like traumatic events, family instability, sexual identity uncertainty, living in social isolation, I think TCKs go through a lot of just stressful life events, and a lot of transition, and a lot of social isolation. Even without COVID, there are a lot of TCKs that don't have a lot of community, don't have a lot of people around, and that may or may not put them at higher risk for self-harm. And then, of course, mental health conditions play a huge role in this. So some self-harm misconceptions, things that we might think it is, but it's not. So I have heard so many times it's about getting attention. It's not a real issue. They just want attention. They just want sympathy. They just want people to look at them. Fill in the blank. And for some it might be, but it's coming from a very genuine place. There is a reason that they want attention, even if that is a factor in why they might be self-harming. It's still looking at why. What do they want you to see that you're not seeing? But most of the time it's not attention seeking. It's their genuine attempt at dealing with their emotions. That it's a mental illness. Self-harm is not a diagnosable illness. It's a behavior that might be connected to mental health. But in and of itself, it's not. And like I said, the last one, it's about attempting suicide. It's not there. It can be very risky, depending on the type of harm and the intensity and frequency, and maybe, they might be at risk to accidentally die by suicide, but it's not an intentional attempt. But it can, if they don't get the support that they need during that time, then suicidal ideation could start. It could lead to that. But again, in and of itself, it's not an attempt for suicide. And those typical feelings of those who self-harm is, this is just a short list: abandoned, afraid, threatened, alone, guilty, ashamed. I think ashamed, rejected, unloved, those are some really common ones that I hear, but all of these. And so it's teens who are struggling. They just have a lot of, deep pain. And this is their way of trying to cope with that. And so it's about looking under the behavior. I talked about looking under the anger. If you've got an angry teen, trying to figure out why they're angry with this, it's the same. Like, what's what's underneath the self-harm, what's driving it, what feelings, what experiences. Um, yeah. And so what can parents or caregivers do? Listen. You're going to hear me say that I don't know how many times today by the time we're done. Listening to our teens, paying attention to their words, validating where they're at, encouraging emotional expression. That's a key thing that I work on in session with them, is that they have all of these emotions they don't know what to do with. And so one of the best things we can do is help them figure out how to do that, help them learn how to use art or journaling or exercise or something else to process their emotions, and get it out. Obviously, seek emergency help when needed, and then obtain professional help. If there's a consistent issue with self-harm in a teen's life, they're going to need support in really diving deep and understanding that. If it's a 1 or 2 time thing, and they can talk through it and understand it and find better tools, then that's okay. But if it's an ongoing issue, they're going to need some intense support to really understand what's driving that and break that pattern. Because one thing with self-harm is that it can be incredibly addictive. And so it can be a very difficult cycle to break if it gets really far, if they get far down that path. So it's be supportive, be encouraging, and also be willing to reach out for help if a teen that you know is struggling in this area. Yeah. And then other things that you can help them. This is just a few ideas. Obviously there's more, but creative outlets I think can be phenomenal for teens in general. These would be good whether or not they self-harm, just helping them learn how to express their emotions and get things out. So poetry, art, singing, journaling, going to a field and screaming. Sometimes teenagers, all of us maybe, but maybe they need to verbalize, they need to scream. And so helping them find places where they can let out what's going on, in safe ways. I talk about that often, is finding ways to express your emotions in a way that doesn't hurt yourself and doesn't hurt anybody else. And outside of that, just about anything goes. So if you need to scream, if you need to throw rocks into a forest, if you need to, maybe journal or like hit a pillow, whatever, but helping them find ways to express their emotions that isn't hurting themselves and isn't hurting anybody else. And then these are just a few things of what's not helpful. And so asking them to stop, just saying, just stop, no more cutting. It doesn't work. That doesn't work for most things. And so, like I said, helping them find other tools, but just telling them to stop or sign something saying, I will never do it again. It doesn't actually motivate them to stop. Taking away privacy, that this one can get tricky. I won't get in depth, but it doesn't actually help. That can be a kind of a go-to, but it tends to just intensify what they're feeling. Threatening them, rejecting that part of them. What's wrong with you? You need help. That again is just going to intensify what they're already feeling and what's already driving them to self-harm. And then at the bottom, minimizing the seriousness and avoiding help. If you know a teen in your life is struggling with self-harm, please do not ignore it and assume it will go away. Don't blow it out of proportion and have a panic attack, but pay attention, and to help them get the support that they need, so it doesn't become something bigger than they want it to be or you want it to be. So changing topics, and I know that I'm going through a variety of topics. So we will have Q&A at the end. So I will wait for that. But if you have questions about any of these topics that I've brought up or things that I've said, please feel free to jot it down, and we'll go through that at the end, because I recognize I'm throwing a lot at you. So if you have questions, jot it down, make a note of it. We'll come back to that at the end. So like I said, teens and sexuality. This is a topic that can be a difficult one to talk about, to understand, but I would be remiss if I did a webinar on adolescents and did not broach this, because this is a huge part of their life and of their reality, where they're at right now. And so on here, I have a bunch of terms, and I said, can you define each of these? I'm not going to ask you to, but I said, because most teens, even TCKs, can do this without even thinking. I think it's interesting. I've thought about this, is that I think 10, 15 years ago, when I first moved overseas, TCKs, there was a lot that they were not exposed to growing up overseas. There was just a lot more isolation. There was just a lot more, not boundaries is not the right word, but they just weren't exposed to a lot of things. And so a lot of these topics, it wasn't as important or relevant until they were going back to maybe a passport country, because often they just didn't see a lot of it. But with the joy of the internet and social media, it's next to impossible for this to not be a part of their world. It might be in varying levels, depending. I don't know where you guys are living or what your contexts are, but as everything is becoming more global, there's just a lot more. It's becoming more normal and common for TCKs to be exposed to the same things that they might be in their home culture. I'm messing up the words. Anyway, they're exposed no matter where they're at, is kind of the point of that, usually. And so it's one of those, it's vital that we're able to engage with that and interact with them in this area. So teens are growing up in a world where it is expected and normal to question their sexuality and gender. That might be intensified in European or North American countries, but that is still common everywhere. And even if they don't find themselves questioning their sexuality or their gender, they generally have very strong feelings and opinions on this topic. I see that a lot. I've had a lot of teens who've said, I know what I am, but I still feel very deeply about these issues or these topics. And like I said here, in my practice, so this is for me personally, the inability of teens and parents to have open conversations about beliefs around sexuality is one of the leading causes of dysfunction and breakdown in these relationships. That's a big statement, a big mouthful, but I have seen it cause massive disconnect. And it's, like I said, it's the inability to have open conversations. And so it's that space of teens and parents may or may not agree, and that's okay. But teens desperately need parents, caregivers, whoever, who are able and willing to engage with them around the topic, about what they believe or where they're at or all of that. And often we're very scared or uninformed, and we don't know how to even broach it, so we don't. And it puts up massive walls between us and teens, between you and your kids. And it might not even be out of anything negative. It might be out of your own discomfort, but it puts walls up and makes us not as trustworthy in teens' eyes if we're unable to even have these conversations. I hope that makes sense. When asked about where they learn about sexuality and gender identity, most teens say online or on social media. That's very normal. That is where they're going for information. And so I've had TCKs actually who live in incredibly remote, isolated, closed off spaces. And and this topic comes up. And so several of them I've asked, like, where did you hear? Why are you thinking about this? What sparked this? And it goes back to the internet and social media and all of that. And so it's just, again, it's one of those, like I said, unless you literally trap your teens with no access to technology, they're going to be exposed to expressions of sexuality that may or may not differ from your own beliefs. And so it's, I'm not trying to say like they're going to be exposed to awful things, but just they're going to be exposed to things that, may differ from your beliefs. It may not, but it might be new to them, and they might not know their own beliefs. And so just being able to have conversations around this as they're learning, as they're asking questions, just being able to dialogue from wherever our personal beliefs might be around that, helping them also navigate that. And like I said, for some of us, this might be incredibly uncomfortable. And for some, maybe it's normal, but it is important that we're able to have just open conversations around sex and sexuality in general, starting young, just making it okay to talk about, and just being there as they navigate that world. Yeah. So for the rest of this, we're going to look a little bit more about connecting with teens and connecting with TCKs. So again, I'll give you a second. If you can, in the chat box, type up one or two just short answers. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what are the best and worst questions to ask a TCK? And what are the best and worst ways to build a relationship with teens? Just kind of type out some of the first things that come to mind. It doesn't have to be a big, long paragraph, but just what comes to mind is like good and bad questions, good and bad ways to build relationships. Worst, where are you from? Yep, so glad somebody started with that one. Yes, that one we know well. That is an incredibly, almost impossible question to ask or to answer. Okay. What else comes to mind? Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? They don't say if that's best or worst. I think it could go either way, depending on the context. For sure. Okay. Lisa, are any coming to you?
No, I'm not sure if anybody's still working on it, but I don't have any more.
Okay.
One did come through, and I'm guessing this is a good one. Do you want me to listen or offer advice?
That is a good question. I like that one. I just got a couple more. A good way to build relationships: be interested in what they are interested in. Listen when they talk. Ask them good questions as follow-up. Yes. Good questions. What makes you laugh? Who are your friends? Yeah, I like the laughter one. And then a good way to connect: going out for a meal. Absolutely. And I'm sure if we sat here, we could probably come up with more and more. This one literally made me laugh out loud. Somebody says, "Why do you like that awful music?" I'm sure teens would love to hear that question. Right. So I'm going to assume that was a worst one. But yes. Yeah. So just going on and on. But I think several of you hit it. Listen, ask questions, be interested, all of that. And yeah, I think most of you probably are pros at what to ask and not ask TCKs. Yeah. So these are just a few quotes that I found that I think are really just maybe like they seem silly, but great reminders. So I am going to read them. Sometimes we forget. We forget that when our kids become teenagers, their needs change. We forget that behind the closed doors, the eye rolls, the heavy sighs, and the whatevers are kids who really need us, but don't know how to express it. We forget that more than anything, they need us to take the time to understand their world. I love that. And this other one, beneath every behavior, there is a feeling, and beneath each feeling, there is a need. When we meet that need, rather than focusing on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause, not the symptom. And obviously that would apply to toddlers as well. Sometimes I think teenagers are just overgrown toddlers, because sometimes a 3-year-old might scream, and the goal is to figure out, why are they screaming? What do they need? Are they hungry and they need a snack? Teens are no different. They're just a little bit bigger and their behaviors might look different, but figuring out what's underneath it. What do they need? And having that be the focus, because I think it's so easy to get caught up in they're yelling and they're rolling their eyes, or they're ignoring us, or they're sarcastic, and not notice like what's going on. What do they need? Whether they have big behaviors or just in general, what do they need? And how can I focus on that and not get caught up in everything else? I think that I often said, to parent a teenager or to support teenagers, you've got to have thick skin, because teens can say and do some things that can be really hurtful. But if we get stuck in that, then we're not able to support them and care for them the way that they need. And so being able to let things roll off, or not sink in deeply, because most of maybe some of the big behaviors or the big things of teens is not personal. And so I don't know if I say that anywhere else in here, so I'll say that now. Being able to not take things personally if a teen is yelling or slamming a door, like maybe it's they've got big emotions that they don't know what to do with, but it's not about you. Which goes to the very last one. I'll see your toddler tantrum and raise you a teen that just had their phone taken away. I'm not sure which of those might be worse, but man, when teens are so connected to the internet, when they lose that can be difficult, but sometimes necessary. So a few, I've called these common complaints. These are things that I hear in my office when I'm talking with teens about their parents or their teachers or member care, whoever it might be. Maybe adults in general. These are some of the things. So this one I love. They expect me to behave like an adult, but they treat me like a child. Because adolescence is such a weird in between of they're not a kid, but they're not an adult. And so they're navigating that. We're navigating that. And it can be really frustrating for everyone involved. But I think that one I've heard several times, but it's so true of what our expectations are. But then we want them to be responsible and make good choices and, do everything an adult would do. But we also want to control them and tell them what to do and not give them freedom and responsibility. And so just that tension can be really hard to navigate. They don't give me the benefit of the doubt. So always assuming the worst, assuming they're wrong, assuming they messed up. This one might be painful. This is almost a direct quote from a teenager I saw. They expect me to participate in their calling when I was never asked if I wanted to be a part of it. And so just some tension there of life overseas. This is not every teen by any means, but it can be a part of being an MK of, as parents, you chose this life. They might not have. And for some, that can be really difficult. And so just navigating that. They want me to tell them everything about my life, and they don't give me enough privacy. Teens value and need privacy, and that is okay and good that they have some of that. They never listen to me, they don't trust me, and they expect me to be perfect. I think that last one is important. Teens need to be able to make mistakes and have that be okay. They need to learn how to grow from their mistakes, how to fix their mistakes, but they've got to be allowed to make mistakes and not be shamed and guilted for that, because we all make mistakes. That's how we grow. And so being able to just come alongside them with grace and help them figure out what to do about that is vital. So connecting with teens. I put this in like steps. It's maybe not that clear, but that's how it is. So I kind of said, step one, be present and interested. If you want to connect with teens, we've got to be around. That one, I said consistent time together. And so, if we show up once a month and say, hey, tell me everything about your life, it's not going to work. They need, the way to build relationships is for it to be consistent over time, day in, day out, especially as parents. Just how you doing? How was the game? How was school? And just kind of doing life together. But being present is vital, and being interested, like we've said a few times, caring about their world, being interested in what's going on in their world. I loved that question earlier about who are their friends? Tell me about them. What are they up to? Like, how's the math test, whatever, but just being interested in their world and whatever it is that they're interested in, and then using natural connections. So someone had said, going for a meal, going for a walk. If you drive your kid to school every day, use that time to check in. It doesn't have to be kind of taking some of those big, okay, I'm going to set aside an hour a month and really talk. But some of the more helpful times are in some of those just, daily, day in and out type events. A lot of times with teens, you'll get a lot more out of them if it's not like staring face to face, having a conversation, but we're going on a walk together. We're sitting in the car together. We're at the store together, depending on what you want to ask, but some of those like side by side things that aren't so intense often will get a lot more just natural flow out of teenagers. And so as you're spending time and caring about their world, the next one I said was be prepared. Teens make shocking statements intentionally to gauge responses. And so, I'm sure probably I could ask, and I'm sure I could have a plethora of stories of things that some of your teens maybe have said. One of my favorite go-to examples is a friend of mine, her 15, 16-year-old son came home and said he wanted to pierce his ears, which in their family was not something mom was comfortable with. And the son knew that, but it became very clear later on that he was simply using it to gauge mom's reaction. And she did a fabulous job of like, okay, why would you want to do that? What's that about? And in the end, and this maybe isn't every teen, he was in a special one, but he was able to say, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see what you would do. I just wanted to see how you would react. And that helps them. It might be annoying or feel whatever, but it helps them know, can you handle me if I talk about real stuff? If I talk about something hard, can you handle it? And so in that, I said, don't overreact. If they know that you're going to freak out if they say something, then they're not going to share. They're not going to feel comfortable to talk about stuff. If they come home and say, I heard today that my friend got drunk last night. If they know that your response is to be, oh my gosh, what happened? They're not going to open up. They're not going to tell you. And so being able to monitor our reactions and just say, okay, let's talk about that. And why do you want to tell me that. How do you feel about that, etc. As we're able to do that, then they will begin to share deep and personal stories. And it takes time, right? And I think it's that piece of, we can't expect them to tell us everything overnight. And as parents, probably can't expect them to tell you everything anyway, because some things they just won't. And so one of the things that I said maybe in here earlier, and I don't even remember actually, but they desperately need adults in their life, caring adults that they can go to. And a lot of times that might not always be parents. They might not feel comfortable with parents, but there's so much value in having an adult in their life that they can talk to. And often, sometimes that adult can be someone who comes alongside the parents and kind of reaffirms maybe what you are doing in your family. I know I was a youth pastor for 8 years or something like that. And that was one of the things that came up a lot, was that there was a lot being discussed or talked about in families. And then, it would come up with me as I was mentoring kids as well. And it's just another layer of someone else who's investing and caring for them and maybe saying some of the same things that parents are. So that's just a side note of that. Yeah, teens, they need adults that they trust, and they need parents who are able and willing to listen and care, and they need people outside of their parents as well. So it's a both and. So the next one I had was, sorry, I'm closing something, was be quiet. Teens do not want or need someone to solve their problems or tell them what to do. I love that question that somebody said earlier. Do you want me to listen or do you want advice? And giving them that choice. And half the time, I don't know, they're going to want someone just to listen. Or maybe they want someone to listen first. I had a 12-year-old boy say to me, I thought it was so profound, is maybe too big of a word, but we were talking about his relationship with his parents. And he said, I just wish that they would listen to how sad I am before they tell me how to fix it. He said, I know that they can help me fix it, and I probably need help, but I just want them to listen first. I want them to just listen and say, I'm sorry you're sad. And then I'll listen to them and figure out, how to fix it. And it just was so cute, but so true of that's what most of us want, but teens especially, having someone who's willing and able to just step back and listen first. And someone who's genuinely seeking to understand their perspective. So not just, kind of mindlessly okay. So I heard your story and now let me fix it for you. But I really want to understand this. I want to understand this friendship and why it's hard for you. I want to understand this, this experience and why that made you angry or what you're confused about. I think that it can be easy to bring in our perspective and expect them or want them to see it from our perspective. And the first goal is to see it from their perspective, to kind of see whatever it is through their eyes. And then we might earn the right to help them figure out what to do with it. But I think probably one of the biggest complaints that teens have is when adults are more prone to lecture and tell you what to do and not just listen and pay attention and try to understand what's going on or where it's coming from. So I also said to be honest when you do speak, make sure it's authentic. Teens can sense insincerity from a mile away. And so if they know that you don't actually care about them, or if they know that you don't actually want to know how their day was or actually understand their story, they're going to shut down. And so being honest and being genuine is vital. I tend to think that's in life, but I would say for teens especially, of just being genuinely interested. And then when you do say something, make sure you mean it. Because they can tell if you're trying to say that must be really hard, but you don't mean it, they'll know. And so if you don't understand or you disagree or whatever, in general, I think it's better to say that, to say, I'm really struggling to understand your perspective. Like I want to, but I don't get it. I don't see it. Or, I know you said that was really hard, or I know you said this, but I don't understand. And so being able to voice that is okay. And that's way better than faking something or saying something that we don't mean. And just avoiding the I'm right, you're wrong. If they are talking about something that happened, a tendency can be, well, that's not what they meant, or that's not what happened, or that's not the case. That will shut down any of us. But again, a teen especially is not going to open up and listen if what they hear is that better, what's right, you can see it better than they can. And maybe you can. That sometimes as adults, we do have a better perspective than teens, and we can see a bigger picture. But before we're able, or before we earn the right to share that, we need to see their perspective. Because maybe we're wrong, right? Maybe we're not right. Maybe we don't understand the scenario. And so just taking that space first to see it from their side, and to ask questions if we're not understanding it. Be willing to apologize. This one, I think, as parents especially, sometimes can be really hard to embrace the humility of going to our kids and saying, I'm really sorry, I screwed up. Or, when I snapped at you, I shouldn't have done that. And, or, the advice I gave you, I was actually bad advice now that I've thought about it. And so being able to do that will go miles in a relationship with a teen. If we're able to go and say, I was wrong, that builds incredible amount of trust and just makes us safer people, makes us trustworthy. And they'll, I have, that's what they want, is to know, are you trustworthy? Will you be honest? Or are you going to try to pretend that you're right and you always have it all together, which we know is not true, right? We know we're not perfect. We know we mess up. And so it's powerful, and it's so good for teens when we're able to say that, and model that. If we make a mistake, then being able to own that and model making repairs, it helps them learn how to do that, right? That's the whole goal, is to help them become healthy adults. And so modeling some of that for them, whether it's apologies or other things, but kind of letting them in, talking about, why we're doing things or how we're making decisions, but modeling those behaviors. But starting with, modeling apologies can be huge. And then I call this one a bonus step. Take time to learn what's going on in teenage culture. Again, if there's one thing that I could say, it would be interested in their world. To build a relationship with them, we have to be genuinely interested in their world, even if we don't get it. I talk with kids all the time. I don't understand TikTok to save my life. Like, I just don't get it. But lots of teens are on that. And so being willing to engage in that and not just write off things that are important to them as dumb. Like, "Oh, that's so dumb, you and your cat videos." We might think they're dumb, but okay, I'll watch it with you. If this is something you find funny or something you find important, or, this book, this author, this whatever, okay, I'll do that activity. I'll read that book. I'll whatever with you. I want to know your world. I as I'm saying that, I was just thinking, when we live cross culturally, we do that naturally, or we try to, right? We move to a new country and we try to understand the culture of that country and how do we connect with people in this new country. It's the same with teenagers. There's a whole teenage culture that is often not our own, and so we have to be willing to be curious about it, and try to understand it and connect in ways that are meaningful to them, and not just expecting them to, do what we like, or, connect. Well, I like talking, or I like going for coffee, so you need to connect in a way that I like, but connecting in a way that they like, even if it's over something that you don't understand. Um, yeah, and in that, I think I said something about this earlier, but helping them learn to safely navigate the joy and danger of online life. As you kind of understand teenage culture, like I said, TikTok can be hysterical, and there can be actually crazy amounts of information on TikTok. And it can also, have a lot of damaging things that are on there as well. And so just being aware of some of that, and then helping them learn how to navigate that, how to make safe choices online. It's, I think sometimes, sometimes our tendency is, well, I just don't want them to have access to anything, which doesn't work. Teens are great at going behind our backs. Maybe not all, some are very responsible or whatever, but it's just a hallmark of teens that they can be very sneaky, for lack of a better word. And it's just unrealistic to expect that they're not going to be online. And so I think it's a better practice to just help them figure out how to navigate that well, which means we have to be a part of it and understand it, and not just, kind of assume, oh, it's fine, or I'll just block it. But okay, tell me, what is this? Why do you like this? What's on there? And just having those conversations and not assuming it's all bad, just because we don't understand it. And so in that note, I put on here Axis. Axis.org is a great resource for connecting with teens, understanding their world. They have a paid service, which has like conversation starters and how to talk about a ton of different topics. It's really got some fabulous information, but I'm mentioning it here because you can sign up for a free weekly email called Culture Translator. And it just tells you like the top 5 trends for teenagers today. That can be just really helpful conversation starters and knowledge to have of like, okay, here's what's going on, and just checking in with your teens. Have you heard of this? Do you know what this is? So it'll have slang, it'll have like events or movements that people are responding to, or just different things that can just be a great conversation starter, if nothing else. So yeah, and I believe that is all. These are just some resources, and I think this PowerPoint will be available on our website later, so you can come back and look at that for any other ideas. But that's all I have for this evening, and so we can just take the next, I think we have about 10-15 minutes just for any sort of Q&A that you guys might have about anything that I shared, or if there's something that you were hoping I would have talked about and I didn't. Just, yeah, any questions that you might have, I am more than happy to answer them. So you can just put them in the chat box, and Lisa and I will kind of filter through them and answer. I'll answer them as they come. Excuse me.
Somebody's asking, I think, a great question here and wonders, would you say that a lot or all of these, maybe some of these topics and issues apply to preteens as well? She specifically asked about like the need for privacy, autonomy, listening ears, etc. Does that apply to preteens as well?
That is a great question. And most of my answer would be yes. I think that, yeah, preteens, if we were talking 10, 11, 12 years old, that they're definitely starting kind of that adolescent phase. And so, privacy might look different in some of that, but those needs, yes, they are there. I think the listening ear absolutely would apply. I think middle school, so 11, 12, 13, I think are actually some of the most difficult years for kids to navigate sometimes because there's so many changes. And so, yeah, yes.
Yeah, next question. How can one or somebody discern if a teen's needs go beyond needing to just being seen, heard, accepted, validated? How do you know when there's deeper stuff going on that may be beyond the scope of just listening and validating?
Yeah, I think I guess the first thing that comes to mind would be just kind of noticing if it's affecting their behavior, affecting their life at school, if there's significant changes in their behavior or in their ability to function, then that's usually an indicator that there's more going on. Yeah, so if there's more isolation, or maybe not eating or not participating, or if their grades are dropping, then those could be indicators that more is going on than just a bad mood. Or if it lasts a while, if they have a week or two, if they're just in a bad mood, that's one thing. But if it's been 4 or 5 weeks and nothing has changed, then that's also could be an indicator. I have a question here. Someone says, what boundaries would you recommend around social media or screen time generally? I don't have a great answer for that. I think some of this, every family is different, and I don't know that there is a right or a wrong. I do think that there should be boundaries and limits. I think that it's something to discuss within your family and with your kid. I think that maybe around screen time in general, finding ways to limit some of that, or to have, expectations, family expectations that they're, involved in activities, or at meals, our phones are away, or, I know that a lot of families at night, phones are not in the bedrooms, which can be a really good practice. I think boundaries around social media. I would look a lot at the age of when kids are being introduced to social media. I don't think we can keep them from it forever, but does an 11-year-old need Instagram? Probably not. Personal opinion. But I think they're just having conversations. And some of that's going to depend on the kid too, because some kids are going to be more prone to be addicted or to be sucked into things, and others might not be. And I think I think there's having an open policy of that you can look at their phone from time to time, or, if something is going on, can be helpful. That can be tricky, so I'm not going to get too much into that one, but yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Another question here about the effects of overseas living and teens with emotional challenges. So they said their daughter struggles with anxiety and ADHD and have been living in the US for the last several years, or considering a return to living overseas next fall, but wonder about just the effects on her. Can you talk about the effects specifically of maybe somebody who's dealing with things like ADHD and anxiety and either living or specifically transitioning to living overseas?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to look at and to think about. And it doesn't mean that they can't thrive well overseas if they have anxiety or ADHD or other challenges. But it is worth looking at how to manage that. And so looking at what types of things, I'm thinking about anxiety, like what types of things might trigger that, what scenarios make them anxious. Do they have the coping skills? Can they develop the coping skills ahead of time to manage some of that? And with ADHD or other, academic things that would affect academics, I think it's also then looking at what kind of school support would they have, if medications are there, kind of looking at can medications continue? Is that something we would have access to? Do I as parents, or does the community have the ability to support them where they're at, with what they have going on? I think looking at resources available would probably be a key question I would have in terms of like kind of helping them be able to thrive, because it doesn't mean that they can't do well overseas, but just looking at, okay, how do we support them so that they do, and not just like, oh, it'll be fine. But I think, looking at resources, and then helping make a plan ahead of time, as much as possible.
I have a few more here, unless you've got ones you're ready for.
I was just reading one. This one says, I do like this one. It says, what kind of support would you recommend for parents and caregivers who are looking after teens going through a difficult time? And I think that's a good point of whether teens are going through a difficult time, or just a difficult teenage phase. Parents need support. And so whether that's community, whether that's, if you have a teen who's really struggling with intense, self-harm and depression and any of that, chances are parents will probably need their own counselor or could benefit from that, just to process that, because it can be so difficult to walk through things with your kids. And so, it can be depleting. And so having community, having friends, having professional support, whatever that looks like, people that you can be honest with. And, if your teen says something really painful that isn't about you, but makes you cry, then having someone that you can cry to about that is really important, so that you can keep going back and caring for them.
Somebody also asked about how to stay connected with teenagers from a distance. This is, I think, specifically a grandparent who's distanced from teens and want to stay connected. Any advice on how to be connected to teens from a distance?
Yeah, I think this is when, and depending on what access people have, this is when, internet and messaging can be really valuable. And so just messaging back and forth, I think some of it too can be in even sharing like funny pictures or funny memes, like things that, you're connecting over that isn't maybe an in-depth, how are you? Tell me how life is going, but just, sharing pictures, or, sharing things that make you laugh, or quotes. And then I think having consistent time, maybe once a month or every other month, we have a Zoom call, and we set that up and we make it happen. And so we're consistently like checking in with people, with teens, if that makes sense.
This is a good question, and especially in terms of, maybe you won't answer it all, but maybe give some resources. Somebody asked if there's specific support or maybe resources that teen TCKs need in terms of processing grief or other normal kind of transition or challenges. Are there characteristic ways TCK teens respond to overseas challenges like grief, loss, transition, etc.? Do you want to offer some maybe resources or highlight some of the resources that you think would be really helpful in that area?
Yeah, I think there are obviously some fabulous TCK resources out there. What jumps to mind off the top of my head is Lauren Wells has recently written, well, actually, I think 3 books on TCKs. And now that I'm saying this, I wonder if I have it. I might have it here. I don't know. Yes, Raising Up a Generation of Healthy Third Culture Kids would just have kind of some of the broader, just caring for teens in general, TCKs. She also has one called the Grief Tower, which is specifically looking at TCK grief and how to process that well, which I think that's a fabulous resource specifically for grief. And then she recently wrote a book for adult TCKs, so kids who grew up overseas and are now adults and still trying to navigate that life and some challenges with that. I've not read that one, but I'm assuming it's as good as her others.
Okay, I think that has been some excellent information, and the flood of questions has slowed down here, so maybe a great time to wrap up. I see several thanks to Amber coming through here. I also just want to thank Amber for her time, especially when she's been a bit under the weather, so she's really taken this on and been willing to be present here with us tonight. When she's been under the weather. So thanks to you, Amber, for that. Thanks to everybody for attending. Amber mentioned this, we will have these resources or PowerPoint, including the resource page and some of these notes for you to refer back to up on our website. Again, in a few days, check back in a day or two if you haven't seen it. And yeah, we'll send out information about the next one shortly, but we're grateful for you joining us. Happy to interact with you. Hope to see you again.